You hear about how soybean farmers are mad again? We have to keep hearing from these people. I don't know why we listen to them, but I do. I like hearing them suffer. The soybean farmers who cannot move any of their product at all because China was buying it, and now China is not buying it due to reciprocal tariffs. We basically locked ourselves out of the international soybean market because we're being undercut by other countries that have formed trade relationships that we're not going to be able to break. But funnily enough, one of the countries that China is forming a trade relationship with in this particular field is Argentina, a country that is taking advantage of the $20 billion bailout our government is running through, despite the government shutdown, to further those trade relations. So in essence, these soybean farmers voted for Trump probably 3 times in a row, and then Trump came to power, them over in his first presidential term, had to gutted the farming industry, had to provide subsidies to make up for it, and now in his second term, he's making things even worse than they were before, and rather than giving them money, they're giving Argentina $20 billion to undercut our soybean farmers. Very good.
Welcome back. Though a deal for TikTok was struck with China last week, huge disagreements remain in regard to technology and tariffs. China is already making clear the power it holds by stopping its purchase of American soybeans. Soybean farmers here are now suffering economically like they haven't in decades. Our Matt Rivers has this story from Nebraska.
Kennard, Nebraska feels a long way from Beijing or Washington.
It's
but
a small
as two
world.
Economic superpowers wage a trade war, these amber waves of soybean are on the front line.
China has not bought a single export cargo of beans so far this year, which is not very typical.
And that's happening because of the trade war.
Correct. When China quits buying, our prices go down.
Scott Thompson is
The reason I think this is particularly funny and worth covering is because of this screenshot, which you might have seen. Scott Bessent here is reading a text. He's reading this publicly, and this got caught by a camera. Scott Bessent. Finally, just a heads up, I'm getting more intel, but this is highly unfortunate. We bailed out Argentina yesterday, and in return, the Argentines removed their export tariffs on grain, reduced their price, and sold a bunch of soybeans to China at a time when we would normally be selling to China. Soy prices dropping further because of it. This gives China more leverage over us on a plane, but Scott, I can call you when I land. So the geniuses running our federal government, it didn't occur to them that bailing out a country with a large soybean agricultural sector might exacerbate a problem where we're not competing in the international market for soybean trade. They actually didn't consider this. This didn't occur to them. The system works. Duped by the fourth kind of economy, Argentina. I genuinely cannot believe how much they are mismanaging this.
The soybean market's almost like the corn market as well, but soybean market is terrible.
Brennan Gilkinson is a soybean farmer in Fayette and Clark counties since graduating from school in 2000. Gilkinson says other than the 2012 drought, now is the worst point he's been in the business.
The prices are driven by supply and demand. We'd like to say it's all tariffs. Tariffs has a lot to do with it.
Soybean prices are dictated by supply and demand. Because of the 20% retaliatory tariff imposed by China, Gilkinson says China has turned to Brazil and Argentina for their soybeans.
Now Argentina, too.
This is bad for business because the largest importer of U.S. soybeans has yet to buy any. University of Kentucky Assistant Extension Professor Grant Gardner believes this may be part of China's negotiating strategy.
If you look at the base of the American farmer, they're loud. So the ag lobby is really loud.
We know. They're like 1% of the population. They make up a smaller percentage of the population than service workers by an enormous amount. And for some reason, they never shut the fuck up.
Be in the president's ear constantly. And so one easy way to kind of push back on the United States is to make sure that they're not helping us out by buying beans.
Gilkinson says he isn't sure what he's going to do next, but adds he's not giving up.
You always fear the worst, but hope for the best. So,
dude, this isn't changing. The government might bail your ass out with, my taxpayer dollars. But China's not reopening the market to America. Why the fuck would they do that? Trump gave China the freest layup in the world, the easiest layup in the world. Gave them just open reign to undercut or to, I guess, facilitate the undercutting of our market.
What we need more than anything is access to markets on a level playing field, and that includes China. Right now, with the
Oh, I'm sorry. Are tariffs bad now?
trade war, and then the tariffs and retaliatory tariffs that have resulted, we're at about a 20% price disadvantage when it comes to what the Chinese have to pay for our soybeans versus the Brazilian soybeans. And the buyers there want our soybeans, and we need to sell them our.
Jesus Christ. Look at that. It's the tone Fox Business is taking.
Kelly, why won't China buy our beans?
Well, Stu, this is direct retaliation for the trade war between our two countries. China knows that American farmers are now losing their biggest customer. I mean, take a look at this. We know that China buys, from government data alone, more than half of all U.S. soybean exports last year, with $12 billion worth of soybeans sold to them. Now, according to the American Soybean Association, we know that China in the last 5 years has bought more soybeans than any other country.
Does anyone else feel like these soybean interviews are a complete soybean farmer interviews are a complete waste of time unless the interviewers also ask who they voted for? Like, I really feel like it's an important part of the story, you know? But they never talk about it, man.
The Trump administration admits farmers are not doing well under President Trump's tariffs, most especially soybean farmers. The, quote, collateral damage, as Politico puts it, in the president's trade war with China. Since May, China has not purchased a single U.S. soybean, not a one, according to the American Soybean Association, turning instead to Brazil and Argentina. That last country there, one that the Trump administration decided to send a $25 million aid package, a bailout that could be backfiring, according to Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins.
Thanks for having me, Katie.
All right, so I thought it was interesting seeing what Brooke Rollins said to reporters there at the White House and the way that she spoke to the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Why might she be so worried about the soybean market?
Well, like we talked earlier, we went from 12 billion to zero. And then, you know, as a farmer, we get up one morning and you give Argentina, which is our second biggest competition in the world, they're the largest exporters of soybean meal in the world. So I get up one morning, I turn the news on, and you give 20 billion.
Corn prices down 50%. Wow, no kidding. Corn prices have plummeted more than 50% from their 2022 peak. Jesus. While production costs are down just 3% in that span.
$1 billion of taxpayer money to my competition. And then the Chinese buy, I think the figure is 30 or 40 containers ships, which is about 65,000 metric tons per ship, which is like 2.2 million bushels. So they buy 12 or 14 billion dollars worth of soybeans from the Argentinians after the tax holiday. And here's the caveat to it. They give $2.30 over the November board, while I'm getting 50 cents under the November board. So that makes the Argentinian soybeans about $12.42 a bushel. I think that's the real figure they gave. So all my premium went.
He's dead.
Scott, I just lost you there at the end. You said your premiums go?
They all went to Argentina.
Yeah. All right. She says that don't worry. It's a time of uncertainty, Brooke Rollins does. Hang on. Relief is just around the corner. What would that relief be? Do you see it coming?
Yeah. Whatever, sir. Who'd you vote for? Exactly. You know, these stupid motherfuckers, not necessarily this guy specifically, who I don't know anything about, but these stupid motherfuckers as a class of people are going to whine and whine and whine, and then they're going to vote for Trump again for a fourth time because they hate black people. You know? Anyway, you know they're feeling the heat. Here's Bessent 2 days after receiving that leaked text message of where internally they were talking about how their Argentine bailouts really backfired and hurt the soybean farmers.
And Joe, to go back on the ag purchases and President Trump's phase one trade deal that was signed in January 2020, there were over 50 billion of ag purchases. The Chinese followed through during President Trump's term in 2020. And then under President Biden, their feet were not held to the fire for these ag purchases. And at the meeting in Geneva, when I asked them, why didn't you continue buying soybeans and the other products, they had one word. Guess what it was? Biden.
So that's the line then. You know it's bad when they're pulling this one out. So this is like uniquely ineffective. Nobody believes this. Soybean farmers are aware of the fact that what's happening here is retaliatory tariffs. Like soybean farmers are plugged enough into their profession that they know this. They don't think magic is lowering the price of soybeans or preventing them from selling to China. Like, they're aware of the fact that it's a direct response, retaliatory tariffs. They know that the bailout went to Argentina. It's not going to work. Canadian corn industry sales are up 35% at the moment, by the way, in fiscal year 2025. Nice. Hopefully we, you all continue to starve us out. So what happens to the soybean that don't sell? Waste? Yep. Thousands and thousands of metric tons of soybeans just rotting. Nowhere for them to even go. Like, it's difficult to even find places to put them all, To a ditch. Oil 2021 all over again. Yeah, at least petrol keeps, They use the soy for feed. That's why corn is crashing right now. Oh, that makes sense. Making the most of it, I guess.
Oh, that sounds like malarkey. Come on, man. All right, Treasury.
Wow. Okay. I didn't expect that response.
Oh, that sounds like malarkey.
I guess that was so like obvious and brazen. It's difficult to pull this one off when you literally were photographed 2 days prior reading a text message of someone in your administration saying, "Oops, we f***ed this one up. We f***ed up and hurt the soybean farmers even more when we gave money to Argentina." It's pretty difficult to bounce off of that one, I guess. Jesus. CNBC is really funny, man. They're all evil finance people, but because they just care about money, like, they're not really big oorah MAGA guys, the way they talk about the administration sometimes is like incredibly entertaining. He doesn't even have, Besson doesn't even have a response. He's just tucking his neck even harder into the shirt collar. Oh my God. Oh yeah, I did see that the farmers are potentially getting a bailout, which they'll need to every single year, so if our budget isn't already strained enough. Using billions in funding from an internal USDA account. What? The USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation Fund, which Trump previously tapped to provide $28 billion in farm aid during his first term trade war with China, has just $4 billion left in the account. Yeah, you don't have any discretionary executive spending. You don't have any. Trump officials, including those of the Treasury Department, are looking at how to tap tariff receipts or other funding to supplement the payments without triggering a messy fight in Congress. How would you directly tap that money? Like, it hasn't been appropriated for those as part of a discretionary fund. Can't do it because the government shutdown has shuttered vast swaths of the agricultural department. Seriously, where would he get this money from? Also, he can't use the tariff money like that. The tariffs don't contribute to a sovereign wealth fund. We don't have, like, the Trump and his administration love to talk as though the tariff money is just sitting in a big vault somewhere. They still control the treasury. That's not how it works. When the government pays people, it doesn't actually the government doesn't take money from taxes and then there's a pile of money and then gives it out to people or whatever. The government creates money when they use it on stuff, and they destroy money when they tax it. This is an element of MMT thinking that is correct. A sovereign wealth fund is when you specifically allocate money like the way you would for a bank account, like in a traditional sense, money that you can use at discretion. But that money that's being eaten up by the tariffs, that's not being appropriated into any discretionary spending source. That's not in a bank account or whatever. Like petty cash. Yeah, like petty cash, basically. Yeah, the Commodity Credit Corporation is a U.S. government corporation to stabilize, support, and protect farm income and prices. But it's tapped the fuck out, man. It's out. They're out of money. The timing of the actual aid rollout's tricky, given it's unlikely to happen or even be possible during the ongoing government shutdown that shuttered vast swaths of the agriculture department. They've also moved to refill the internal USDA fund of the government funding fight later this fall, but that too will be a battle with Democrats. Wait, later this fall? When did this come out? This is from today. Okay, later this fall. Yeah, okay. Apparently, even at the earliest possible rollout date, even if they got the money, it's too late to save the farmers. I don't know what that means, too late to save the farmers. Do we have some deadline at which point the financial burden borne by the soybean farmers will be too great? Because they've been out the water for months now, We know they're not going to starve to death, at least. They all shot themselves. The Department of Agriculture has a big ticking clock in the head office till it's the great suicide date, the countdown.
Breaking news now coming to us from the White House. Eamon Javers joins us with more on this. Eamon, what do you have? Contessa, we've got new reporting here from the Wall Street Journal just within the past couple of moments, putting a number now on that aid to farmers that President Trump has been talking about all week to basically bail out the farm sector from some of the damage that they've had from the retaliatory actions from China as part of the trade war. The Wall Street Journal reporting that the total package the Trump administration is considering now is between $10 and $14 billion in aid to American farmers. They caution that that is still maybe a bit of a moving target. Discussions are...
Okay, for one, that is not nearly enough because those soybean purchases are not coming back. And for two, where the f are you going to get that money from? The executive branch doesn't just have a discretionary... You don't have a bank account.
Are ongoing, and they're sourcing here people familiar with the conversations. We saw Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on CNBC this morning saying a bailout package for farmers could come as early as Tuesday. Not clear whether that is a set in stone date.
How the would that come out by Tuesday? No, how, where? Money isn't magic, man. What are you? You're gonna plot a bailout, find the money for the bailout, and then deliver it by Tuesday when the government is shut down? How?
For that bailout package, but clearly the details now taking shape behind closed doors, and the Wall Street Journal reporting that the total dollar value here could be between 10 and 14 billion. Remember,
doesn't the president have $5 billion in his disposal? $4 billion left in that account.
Some of those farmers have been really hard hit here because the Chinese have not ordered any soybeans at all from American farmers this year. That would normally be billions of dollars a year in transactions that those farmers are going.
So let's go to another subject now, if we might, okay? And Will, please.
Can I ask you about farmers, though? About the farmers?
Yes, go ahead.
What does that look like? Is that going to be direct checks to farmers, or is it going to be
well, we haven't decided that. We'll be dealing with Brooke later and the Secretary of Agriculture, and we'll figure out how to get money to the farmers. And again, this comes out of...
Don't they still have like $400 billion in stolen appropriated money that they haven't spent the way they were supposed to? It doesn't quite work like that. If the government cancels on congressionally appropriated funds, that doesn't mean that the executive branch just has a pile of money that's left unspent. You know? You think of it, when the executive branch spends money, they're doing the second half of a magic spell that actually creates the money to be spent. They don't like pull the money from a bank account. The money didn't exist. Congress carved the room for it, and then the executive enacted it. And thus the money is created. So it's one thing to just not do their half of the magic spell and cancel congressionally appropriated funds, which is, by the way, illegal, and they're doing it constantly. But it's another thing to redirect those funds, because now you have to create the executive half of the magic spell without the support of the congressional half of the executive spell. It's not like impossible, it's just really difficult and finagly and can't really be done super duper quick. You need to pull it from like pre-existing discretionary funds or some kind of like actual bank account that gets filled by the Treasury, which you can do, but it takes time. And also the Treasury filling stuff is its own kind of magic. It's not just like literally piles of money moving around, you know? And also the government shut down, yes.
Large amount, hundreds of billions of dollars of tariff money that's pouring into the country. The tariffs, remember when I said a long time ago, I said it's the greatest word, it's my favorite word in the world. Then I had to say, I was forced to say other things, and of course, right.
Okay, if the money doesn't exist beforehand, how does this fit in with bonds? You mean when you buy a bond? It's kind of crazy, but when you buy a bond, the money gets destroyed and abstracted. It's like when you buy a bond, it isn't going to a government bank account, right? The money isn't like a real thing. The money that you bought the bond with is destroyed. And there's like a mathematical calculation of the relationship between the money that is eradicated, the debt that the government now owes you, and also what the amount of money they have available to them in the future is. The reason the government, sells bonds and gets their money by selling their debt and so on isn't because they couldn't provide the money otherwise, but if they provided the money in a different way, it would destabilize the perceived legitimacy of the currency. It's kind of like how if the Fed wanted to, it could print infinite money, but if it just did that willy-nilly, the money would become meaningless and everyone would lose faith in the institutions that insure the money. Does that make sense? So the banks have no money. The banks have a very small amount of money compared to the total amount of money they control. Like they have a very, very small amount of actual money relative to the value of their holdings. Money is debt. Money is an abstraction. It is an abstract form that the government creates and maintains the legitimacy of in order to facilitate commerce within their jurisdiction. And the amount of money that actually exists, like in actual circulation, is a tiny fraction of the amount of money that exists in an abstract sense. The government, when it taxes you, doesn't take all of that money and put it in a bank account. It doesn't take like $4 or $5 trillion or whatever and put it in like the world's biggest bank account that they then pay out from or whatever. That money is just destroyed. It's just eradicated. Usually people don't send dollar bills when they pay their taxes. It's taken out of bank accounts or whatever. The money that's taken out of your bank account, it's not added to another bank account for the government. It's just eradicated as part of this big ledger that the government keeps track of in order to maintain control over this abstract system of like commodity and transactional management. Does that make sense? Anyway, sorry. It's very it's far more complicated than what I've described because I don't understand how all of it works. I'm just saying that the executive branch doesn't have a like bank account to pull from. Well, it actually has a few, but they need to have the money in them filled. They can't just like cancel $4 billion in foreign aid and then use that $4 billion somewhere else. It's the magic spell doesn't line up.
So love, family, religion. So I think I put tariff number 5. I was forced because the fake news did a big number on me. It's one of those little, but let's say it's my favorite.
What about the physical dollar bills? Those do actually exist, but the government maintains like a consistent circulation of them. And those are meant to facilitate like small grade transactions, you know? Like, you know, just people at a drugstore or whatever. It's just a physical representation of the same abstract concept. The reason I'm talking about this, just to round it all back, is because Trump keeps talking as though the tariff money that he's been raising, like the money he's been getting from tariffs, has been going into a bank account that he can use to pay for things, which is not how it works. The money that the government gets through tariffs is eradicated. The government keeps a ledger of the money they receive through tariffs, and by reducing the total amount of money in the money supply, right, because it's been tariffed, i.e. brought back to the government, the value of money overall in theory, goes up because the government is destroying money. The more you tax, the less money there is in circulation, the more the remaining money is worth. And then they keep that ledger and they factor it into future budgetary considerations when they pay out to their workers and their tax rebates and their so on and so on. But it doesn't just go into a bank account.
5th favorite word, the word tariff. But it's making our country very rich. And when our country is rich, I'm able to help the farmers and I'm able to help even other countries that are in trouble, you know. But we're able to help people that are in trouble. Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. It's all a benefit of this tremendous.
Like he's lying. What's with the money that's out of circulation? Like you said a while ago, that there is most likely massive amounts of money outside of circulation owned by billionaires. It's not most likely. We know that it is. Yeah, that's not a most likely thing. We know that for a fact. Yeah, but that has to do with the velocity of money. Okay. This is actually really fundamental to understanding like post-Keynesian economics and how you fix these problems in a modern monetary context. And I don't mean that MMT. I mean like modern, like now. Okay. I don't mean MMT. But MMT theorists are right on some stuff. But I disagree with them on some stuff, and I don't think their theories work that well if you're not the international reserve currency. Okay. Like, understand it this way, all right? Imagine that you have a total money pool of USD that is 10 trillion. No matter what, the amount of money that exists in the economy is 10 trillion. In reality, it's more complicated, but let's simplify, okay? Now, let's say that we're doing this in an unequal economic system like capitalism, where money flows upwards over time, right? So after a year of business transactions and so on, let's make it really simple. It's 10 trillion, and you give a bunch of money out to everyone in the economy in the form of like wages and supplemental checks and subsidies and tax rebates and so on. Everyone starts the year with a bunch of money, right? And then economic transactions take place. And over the course of a year, the money flows upward, right? You are, a regular guy. You don't own property. You don't own a business. You don't own the means of production. So when you spend your money, you are buying other people's goods and services. The money leaves you and goes to other people. Meanwhile, if you own a bunch of property or you own a bunch of businesses, in addition to the money that you received from the beginning, other people are giving you money. So money flows upward, right? The total amount of money in the economy remains the same, but over time, it becomes more unequal. People down there at the bottom have much less and are, trading for a pittance for what they can, working for a pittance. People at the top have an enormous amount, and they can get even more too, because once you have lots of money, you benefit from stuff like the economy of scale. There are more ways to make more money if you already have more money. Why does it flow up? That's just how capitalism works. So anyway, right? At the end of the day, everyone has the economy still contains 10 trillion. Now, the idea for taxation under a government, okay? The idea is that you pull money from the economy, eradicate it, and then redistribute, in this example, the same amount of money out to more equitably distribute it. So let's say you have a progressive taxation system like the US did back in 1946, and you tax a ton of money from the wealthy, some money from normal people, and from the poor, nothing. You take a bunch of it, and you, the government, have not assembled a big bank account or whatever. You have not taken the money and put it in a vault. You've eradicated it from the economy. It doesn't exist anymore. The money is not there. And you've marked it down in your book. Let's say you tax a total of 5 trillion. And then with all that money, you then go about funding all the stuff the government does, all the federal, state, and municipal programs, trillions and trillions of dollars of stuff. And it goes into wages and it goes into programs, and the money goes out to people and it's redistributed, right? You are creating that money. You are not taking the taxes and putting them back out there. You are creating that money. That is new money that you are producing. Your job as the Fed, as the government, is to maintain the value of this currency, to make sure that it does its job, facilitating transactions, allowing people to engage in commerce, and allowing the nation to remain stable. It is the money does not exist outside the trust the government allows you to afford in it, okay? Now, a problem we have in the modern day economy is that the velocity of money is very, very low relative to how it used to be. It used to be, as recently as 50, 60, 70 years ago, that a significant portion of the amount of money that existed in the economy was being moved around in regular day-to-day transactions. Even wealthy people would buy stuff like big yachts, but big yachts are a purchase that go to companies that pay wages, A wealthy person buying a big yacht isn't that bad in terms of overall economic health. People got paid to make that yacht, ideally. I hope they weren't slaves. That's fine, right? The problem is that nowadays, ultra-wealthy people don't buy things with their money. They sit on huge hoards of money that are accumulated through speculative investment on the stock market, and they then, rather than spend that money, they leverage it by using it as collateral to take loans with interest rates, interest payment expectations that are lower than the expected rate of return on future investments. So rather than use their money, they use the fact that they have so much money as collateral to secure loans to invest, which means that none of the money actually moves in purchases. The velocity of money goes down. So we're dealing with a bunch of problems that stem from the fact that A, debt as a concept is destructive to society, in my humble opinion, and B, the government is not doing its job of making sure that money is being circulated through the economy. Instead, more and more and more and more of it is just hovering up at the top in a big bubble. That's the gist of it. It's not being spent. If the wealthy, it didn't used to be this way. If the wealthy were spending their money, even if they were making it back, it wouldn't be as much of a problem. Tell me, would the wealthy be as much of a problem as they are today if their wealth circulated in the form of them paying out very high wages, which you then spend on your groceries and your, luxury goods and so on, and the money then flows back up to them, but then they just pay it right back down to you, like the Ford model line, the idea that if you circulate a very large amount of money, since you own the factories, it does come back up to you, but you have to keep that cycle moving. We're in a race to the bottom right now. We're on the other side of the equation, where rather than lots of money being reinvested to keep the velocity of money high, all the money is pulling up, It's like, It's like the water cycle. It's like you have a basin or like a ravine in a mountain range, you know, and all the water pools down in it. When the snow melts, all the water trickles down through the plants and the soil and the rocks and so on, and it pools into this crater in the center. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the water cycle requires that water to circulate. All the plants up on top of the mountain can't survive unless they get water too. And in the real world, we get that because of evaporation from the basin, right? The little lake that forms in the basin, it evaporates, it becomes clouds, and it rains down, and that allows the plants along the mountain to stay healthy. But if you were somehow to prevent the evaporation, you would just have more and more water over time pooling down at the bottom until eventually nothing moved. And when nothing is moving, all the plants up there at the top die. If you invest money, the money is doing stuff. Not if the people who receive the invested money are just using it like to fill out their portfolio. No. It's not continuing to move. The whole idea, like if you spend your money at a drugstore and then the owner of the drugstore spends it to fix their window, and the window fixer then goes and spends it like buying groceries, and the grocer then spends it, so on and so on. Like that's money moving. That's velocity. If you invest in a stock, and that stock, the value of that stock then just sits in a guy's, speculative wealth assessment, just like a giant bubble of money that never moves. It only gets like leveraged. That doesn't fix it. What's your view on credit? Evil. What's your view on debt? Evil. Yes, this is why stock buybacks should not be legal. What's your view on inflation? Necessary. What's your view on money? I'm not really an anti-money guy, I don't think. I think that like money is an abstracted system for determining and like managing value exchange. Yeah, it's a tool that can be used, I think. You could have money without capitalism, but fundamentally the problem here isn't actually money. It's the rules of the money, which we create, you know. Isn't money just credit with more steps? No. There's a difference between a credit line and money as like a tool of the government to facilitate commerce. A credit line exists so that more money can be made by the creditor, right? Whereas money is produced because the government wants like the stability that is afforded by having some kind of consistent means of transaction. It's different. One of them is, mutually beneficial. One of them is not. Well, credit can be mutually beneficial. My argument is that that benefit could be obtained without the use of credit. You would just get like a grant. You would just get money. A lot of lefties have a really bad understanding of this, like fundamental monetary policy stuff, or like the role money has. I think a lot of people think that, like, for instance, they think of like money and capitalism as related, which they're not really. Not really. They think of the issue as like wealth inequality fundamentally, when in reality, I think it's more to do with sustained wealth inequality. Wealth inequality on its own would be relatively benign if the wealth was redistributed, but in order for you to understand how the redistribution works, you have to know how money exists, and the fact that it's an abstraction. It doesn't really like exist in a material sense. It's just destroyed and then reallocated and so on. Honest question: if you think debt and credit are bad, how do we facilitate large-scale purchases of labor products like housing? Well, I think housing should be decommodified, personally, in my humble opinion. Also, I think that like home ownership as a concept really needs to be re-examined, especially in urban areas, because it seems like there are a bunch of really negative downstream effects to anything involving like ownership in an area where the commodity is scarce, and it's possible like for there to be widespread social harm from the misuse of your private property. Wait, how do you handle shit like huge ships and factories and aircraft? Buddy, if you're buying an aircraft, you can pay cash. You can work out a payment plan. A payment plan works out fine. The problem with debt, like, necessarily isn't the owed money part. It's the leveraging debt on an investment part, But there's a difference between debt and a payment plan. Though I guess you could abuse the blurry lines between these definitions. But yeah, it's difficult, I think, to imagine a world where these fundamental rules are altered. But I really genuinely think that the reason everything's going to shit, everything is falling apart right now, stems fundamentally the fact that you can make more money by leveraging your assets to take on more debt to invest that money. That makes you more money than like building a chair. You know what I mean? Like, why would anyone ever build anything? The margins that Walmart operates at? Walmart operates at like nothing, like 1%. Airlines, barely even 1%. Like, there are so many industries and services where they make no money. And then you see where all the money is being made, and it's in speculative bullshit. It's in like AI startups. Literally, like half the economy, like the entire economy, is like 8 tech companies. half of which do nothing. Very, very dangerous. Chomsky called it the financialization of the economy. I think that's accurate. Why is that? I mean, read Marx. No, really, like, it's not necessarily the tendency for the rate of profit to fall, but it's like fundamentally it's a race to the bottom, right? Like, if you have a system that's profit oriented but is also incentivized to deliver services and goods at their lowest possible cost, which it is. Capitalism is incentivized to do that. It has to bend over itself and create a bunch of rules to somehow still continue to make an exorbitant profit, even in situations where they're like we live in a world where the cost of pharmaceutical goods at like a raw level is basically nothing, right? There's so much stuff that's really, really cheap and easy to get, like. Everything is cheaper now. Everything's easier now than it used to be, right? To make. It's easier to get. But a lot of these things cost a lot, not because of the actual like cost of production, but because of middle manager bullshit, administrative costs, tariffs. There's a whole bunch of like government finagling that gets involved. Or you get weird pricing plans where like Spirit Airlines only stays open because people pay $20 extra per flight to unlock the button that, you know, retracts the spikes on the back of their seat, you know? You create this system where, like, in the end, nobody benefits. Companies are shutting down, guys. You know that, right? Managers are getting fired. The economy's bad for a lot of people, except for a very, 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 very small amount of people on top. Now, you can't have an economic system where wealth is afforded only to the people who produce in a disproportionate sense, and then also have that system be unequal to this extent, because a lot of people produce, man. There are a lot of businesses out there. There are a lot of companies, right? It's not quite as simple as the like, well, there's the bourgeois and the proletariat, because a lot of people who are technically bourgeois are also like nervously awaiting their next power bill right now. It goes beyond ownership of the means of production and more towards like when you become the symbolic head of these financial institutions or these financial leviathans that just exist to accumulate stockholder value, you know? It has nothing to do with producing anything. The financialization of the economy. At the end of the day, the point of all of this, is to subjugate. It's not really to like efficiently manage the economy. It's not about facilitating lower cost of goods and services or the accessibility of these things or whatever. It's about like finding ways to separate haves and have-nots. But isn't the largest expense of a pharmaceutical company R&D, and it's expensive because of the specialized knowledge? That's not really what we're talking about. I'm not sure what you mean. You know what would be really interesting to do sometimes, like as a research stream? A really, really interesting research stream would be to take a look at corporate risk-taking back 100 years ago versus corporate risk-taking today. My bet is that companies used to risk it all on a big product a lot more often, and nowadays everything is just like looking for that big IPO payoff. That would be my guess. My guess would be like the world used to be full of a lot more like inventor entrepreneurs, or even existing big companies used to like put out bold new efforts more often, but ever since the economy became widely financialized, the actual big bold risk has nothing to do with making a new product, but rather attracting as much investor attention as possible, you know? Modern companies are incredibly risk averse. The first iPhone was bold and innovative, you know? The next 16 were all... You know that Apple has been deliberately like withholding updates and features from every iPhone model because they want to save it for the next one? Like they know they're just selling you the same product over and over. So they deliberately like they're like, okay, we can't add too much to this model. Let's add it to the next one, because we need to have something to get people to buy the next model. We need to have a reason to keep existing. That's why you don't buy Apple. Yeah, but it's like every company though. I just used Apple as an example. They're doing that with AI presently. Yeah, but how is there any risk taking in in spending a bunch of money on a new product when the real thing you're after is a ton of investor attention? It doesn't actually matter whether your product makes a profit. OpenAI hasn't made a profit on their product. ChatGPT isn't pulling in billions. OpenAI is pulling in billions because of all the people engaging in speculation.